Hi everyone, Assalamualaikum, and first of all, I would like to thank you all, the whole audience, for watching this program. And I, Farhan Javed, the co-founder of Elegant Digital Signage, the part of Investing, Jumpstart, the PA Training Solutions, and a part of much more organizations. I would like to say welcome to you all, and not only the welcome, but I would like to say that I think after some months I will be back on this platform. So it's a great player, and I'm really excited once again to meet my all the viewers. Not only this, but I'm also excited because today the guest we have is not from the Pakistan. In fact, she's from outside the Pakistan. She's a foreigner, and she will guide us about some very important topic that is the fundamental for all things, all the aspects, all the fields. So, without wasting even a single second, I think we have to move towards our today guest, Miss Brittney. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I think it's a pleasure and an honor for us that you are with us today. I think moving forward towards the topic, but before that, I would like to have an introduction from your side, and that should be, I think, the brief one, and audience should know that from which phase you had started this whole life and now what you are. So let's start the introduction.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Brittney-Nichole Connor-Savarda. I am in the United States on the East Coast in North Carolina. And my background is in psychology, early childhood education, and then I have a minor in computer science. So I'm kind of all over the place in terms of education. However, my passion is definitely working with entrepreneurs. And also now I just launched my second business, Generation EQ, where I work with families and their children. But everything I do, whether it's with entrepreneurs and organizations or with families and their children, it all revolves around emotional intelligence and effective communication strategy, because that is the foundation of a healthy organization, a healthy family, and just an overall well-balanced life, right? Because communication is the foundation of our thoughts and our actions. So I worked for corporate America. I was at Wells Fargo for about 3 years after I graduated college, and I was in their technology and operations department. But I was the liaison between software developers and internal lines of business. And I started to notice that there is a gap in communication between these two departments. The developers were very analytical thinkers, and the lines of business just wanted the end results. And they became very frustrated with one another, trying to tell the developers what they needed, not realizing the work involved with that. Making very small, minor changes isn't very minor or small to a developer always. So it was my job to effectively communicate that and bridge the gap of communication between developers and internal lines of business. While I was working within Wells Fargo, I started to realize this communication issue wasn't a selective group of people or a field. It was just a people issue. It spans across all lines of businesses. It spans across every culture. It is just something that we as human beings do not do very well. And I think the reason for that is because we were never really taught how to effectively communicate. So that is essentially what I do with Catalyst for Change and Generation EQ.
That's great, and I think the one of the point you had mentioned that you are, I think, covering about both technical and non-technical side. So, as my journey also belongs to the same field, so I was really excited for this discussion. And as you belongs to, I think, a science field, and I'm also an IT engineer. So there is no doubt in this thing that there is a huge gap between these two fields, and one have to focus on this thing. I think before moving forward, having the detailed discussions from the questions from the audience side, or the questions that I have at this time, first we have to discuss this point and made a solutions that how from the starting level, like after graduation or at the point of graduation, and then to the organization, there is a gap of this communication. So how we can overcome this issue? There might be solutions for this one that you had find till now in your field, your career. So what are your recommendations, your solutions for this thing?
So I want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. Are you talking about transitioning from working in an organization for your own organization?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um, so how to start your own business essentially is what you're saying. Is that I
Yeah,
just want to make sure I'm hearing you
yeah.
right.
Yeah, there is a communication, I think, within the team, and because one graduates, he do not have enough communication skills. So when he moves towards the team side, uh, there is a lacking of these skills, and they are not capable enough to understand each other. So how we can overcome this issue?
Okay. I hear you now. So whenever we join a team, we always want to feel like we're smart, right? It's like we want to show them the value that we bring. And so the problem with that is whenever we want to prove something to someone, we're usually talking more than we're listening. And we can't be of value until we truly understand what that team needs. And we don't know what that team needs until we start working with that team. And we have to be able to listen. So I think the very first step is to put the ego on the shelf and don't feel like you have to prove anything. I think that whenever you go in willing to learn from the people of the team, it develops a stronger bond with your team members and it shows them that you respect them and you're truly willing to learn. And that in of itself proves that you are of value. But when we want to try to prove that we are valuable, oftentimes it backfires. And instead, we look very arrogant to the team. So I would say go in, don't feel like you have to prove anything to anyone. Go in willing to learn. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions because you can't gain knowledge and insight until you start asking questions and find the answers to that. And gain various perspectives from different people because everybody has their own way of doing things, everybody has their own perception. So, gather as much data from people as you possibly can on what works for them well, what doesn't work for them well, and listen to everyone's perspective. I think you'll gain a lot of respect from your team members when you do that. And it just makes the transition much easier. So I would say that that would be the ultimate first step is just to listen and ask questions. And if you don't understand, if somebody replies with an answer that you can't grasp, let them know, I'm not sure about this terminology that you use. I've never heard of this before. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more, maybe in layman's terms, or can you show me? Don't feel like you have to um, act like you know what they're talking about if you don't, because that's going to set you up for failure as well. Because if you don't grasp those key concepts at a foundational level, then you can't build on top of that. It's just like learning anything, whether it's a language, whether it's mathematics. If you don't grab the basics, then you'll never be able to build on top of that. Does that help?
That's really important point that I think put your ego aside, then you can focus on the other aspects, other points, other point of view. So I think this is really an important point. No, there is a I think communication itself is not just listening, speaking. I think it's a bit broad field.
Mhm.
So in that field, when we move in the organizational way, in organizational behavior, if you think of that thing, so there is something I think it is like a documentation, so that there is a communication that's passed on through the documents, through the by hand, by writing. So how we can even indulge that communication, uh, or improve that way, that communication way, that is through the writing side. So what skills or what potential should be added so that to improve that one?
Yeah, so with technology, you always have kind of peer review, right? Like pair programming, where you have other people kind of look at your code while you're doing it just to make sure it makes sense. And I think that goes along with any type of documentation within an organization, making sure that you have other people reviewing that documentation to say, does this make sense? And having people that may not be familiar with whatever that document is to review it to see if it makes sense to them. Because what often happens is we become so skilled at whatever it is in our field that it just seems second nature to us, and we don't disclose all of the information that someone else that has no awareness of this may need. So if we're talking about something and we're using acronyms or we're using language that is just not common language, we may need to be careful to define that in the documentation or to simplify that and have other people read it and say, does this make sense? Um, Whenever we have information in our brains, we have a full picture, exactly what we're visioning. And so whenever it comes either out of our mouth or whenever it is even written down, whether it's creating an email or a text message or training material, whatever that is, whenever we transfer it from the brain outward into this physical world, it usually isn't all together the way it is up here. There's just fragments of it. And so, whenever we're able to pass that off to other people for review, they can identify those missing pieces that were up here but never came out here or in writing or in text. So peer review is very important in that, and people outside of that department, instead of having people that think and act just like you review it, you need to have alternative perspectives.
Exactly, that's really a point. However, we got one of the question from the audience side, that is, can you please guide us how we can put ego aside?
Oh
So I
man,
think
that's a good one. I think being self-aware and really looking at the world from alternative perspectives, because it's natural. We're egocentric beings. That is just natural human behavior. And we can get into this state of thinking that everything revolves around us. But when we realize how massive this universe and world is, and that the functions that go on in our day-to-day life is not our doing. It takes a village, right? It takes everyone working together to make that happen. And when we realize that the world would still go on without us, when we become aware of that, then we realize that we are not the center of the universe. And to work with other people, that's where the magic is going to happen. So how do we do that? How do we become self-aware? Um, I think we've really just have to stop talking so much and again start listening, because if we're not talking, then we can't talk about ourselves and it's not about us. And when we listen to other people, we start to realize that other people think differently than us. People have different ideas than us that we can benefit from and build onto. And so that way we see ourselves as a piece of the puzzle and not the puzzle itself. We are a piece of the puzzle. So I think that's a great way is to start to realize we are one piece of a puzzle. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I hope that answer will be clear to this Zen of Fatma. So, moving forward, we have, I think, another question that's how can we increase the vocabulary sense? I have another question, but I think after this, I will place that one that's a bit related to this thing. So, how can we increase the vocabulary sense?
Reading, obviously. And I keep going back to listening. I know I keep going back to listening, but we learn from other people. So that helps us pick up on additional vocabulary. But for me, I mean, it's just constantly reading things and uh, seeking out synonyms. So if I want to use like some different words, I will type in a word that I know and say, well, what else could I use instead of that? I mean, the beauty of having technology at our fingertips is we can find so much information to develop our communication skills and vocabulary.
That's really a great that by listening, by reading, we can increase all this. So my question is a bit related to this thing that no doubt our countries like we belong from the Pakistan, similarly multiple other countries. So every country has its own national language. Similarly, when we bring up, we have the mother tongue. So these all languages vary from region to region. But as we have English, that's the international language, and I think that might be the one of the language that is a way of communicating from one region to the different regions. So to improve that thing, what's your suggestion? Is like if I'm a Pakistani, I can't speak like a one who take birth in the Europe or his mother tongue is the English. So is it I think necessary that we have to focus on improving just the language, or for the communication other than this other aspects are also in the important one, and what those aspects are?
So I'm not sure if I'm grasping exactly what you're asking. I know you said that like English is kind of like one of those universal languages that is kind of wrapping around the globe, right? It's not necessarily the native language, but you said that there's other communication styles. Is that what you're saying? Like, what are some other communication styles we can develop? I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So regardless of what language you speak, communication, there's some similarities, right? Like we communicate through our body language, and that is one of the primary communication styles. So even if you're speaking a completely different language and you and I are trying to communicate with one another, the expression on my face, the body language that I am presenting to you or you are presenting to me is going to speak volumes about what you are trying to communicate. If I am smiling at you and I have soft eyes, then there's this pleasant energy that is exchanged between us, right? But if I am scowling and I am looking at you like this, no matter what language I am speaking, if I'm shrugging like this and looking at you like this, you are going to know that I am upset about something and I am angry. That's universal. Um, and I think that there is a significant disconnect between what we say and how we react. And to me, that is disingenuine communication, because a lot of times we follow a social script of how we are supposed to speak to one another, what we're supposed to say, that it's appropriate to say, but we may not internalize that feeling. So if you are talking to me about something and you genuinely want me to listen and understand, I may say, I understand. Yes, I understand. I get it. I get it. But my body language is saying, I don't understand. Versus if I say, I understand. My expression is different. I am trying to empathize and connect with you in that way. And I think that, again, regardless of what language you speak, what country you are in, we have to start genuinely connecting with one another, not necessarily just through our words, but through our actions and how we feel about that other person. If we don't have genuine interest and willingness to understand, no matter what we say, our body language is going to show the truth, right? And I think that's where we need to shift our mindset, is realizing that, again, we are all working together to make this world function, and hopefully aiming to make it a better place, whether that's through our business or through our personal lives. But the disconnect in organizations is people are out of sync, and the energy that is tied to that communication is not congruent. It's not correlating, right? It's very disconnected, and businesses are not going to function properly, and we're not going to be creating genuine, authentic relationships in our lives if we can't genuinely connect when we communicate.
Now I got this point exactly. So that's really a great answer. Moving forward, we are receiving multiple number of questions here. So one of the question I had put in the on screen, that's how can control brain chartering. So
So I'm assuming what they mean by brain chattering is our constant thoughts that are in our head, the voice inside our head. And I think a key thing is to acknowledge that voice instead of dismissing it and trying to ignore it, and say, well, what is it saying? And is this something that I'm creating, or is this a reality? So for example, I'm just going to use something for an example. If we are in a team setting and we hear someone laughing in the background with another coworker, and then in our heads, we start to think, what are they laughing about? Is it me? Then we start to analyze ourselves and say, what about me are they laughing about? What did I do to make them start laughing? So again, the ego kicks in, and we make whatever is happening outside all about us. And then we start to kind of follow that narrative in our heads as if it's the actual reality. So, regardless of what you are telling yourself in your head, you need to stop for a second and say, is this really the reality of the situation, or could they be laughing at something else? And secondly, why am I concerned if they are laughing at me? Why am I letting that affect me? Because we are in control of how we feel about everything. Feelings are not something you can hold onto. They're not physical. So when people say they're making me feel uncomfortable, nobody can make you feel anything. So whenever we have these thoughts inside our head, we have to ask ourselves, why are we allowing that chatter to affect our reality? Because that is something that we have complete control over. Now, if it's concerning us so much, then we maybe can address it and ask people a question, I just want to make sure I didn't do anything. Did I do something? And if they say no, then let it go, right? But even if they are laughing at you, you need to have that security within yourself to know your value and self-worth. So I don't know if you can ever eliminate the chatter in your head, but you can address it and bring attention to it And that way you can say, am I making an exaggeration about this? And why is it bothering me? And once you address it, you can move on. So I would just say, acknowledge it.
Actually, the example you have given, I think that example, this issue has been cleared to Miss Kamal Fatma. The question was from her side. So, moving forward to another question that is again from the same lady, that's Miss Kamal Fatma. She's asking that how can control the habit to monogamous?
I'm not sure if I
My God.
understand that question. Can we clarify that just a little bit more?
Okay, Ms. Kamal, you are requested to, I think, if you are here to US, kindly repeat your question or elaborate it. We're going forward to another one, and that's from Mr. Thalafekar. He's asking that how can we sync the brand and the words for the effective communication?
Oh gosh. So when it comes to branding, so this is what I tell people. I'm a people problem solver. I'm not a business problem solver, right? So there's a difference. And I don't have a background in like marketing and telling people, you know, how to connect their brand to share that with customers. But I think if you're a business owner who has a product that you are genuinely passionate about, um, always connect with the why instead of the functions. So instead of telling your customer like this is what my brand does or this is what my brand stands for, this is the service or the product that I provide, focus more so on why, right? What are the problems that they're facing that they can connect with to that brand? So for me, the why is I want to help individuals live a more fulfilling and balanced life. That is my why. And that is how I sell my brand. I don't tell people, I help you develop effective communication strategies using emotional intelligence and blah, 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 because that doesn't connect with people. People buy on emotions. We are emotional beings. We only then, once we connect with something on an emotional level, only then do we rationalize. So I would say connect to their why and what you do for them and how it links to that emotion, and then tell them your services that will help with that. I hope that helps.
That's a great point of why, because what's my perception is that I think every C and every mindset belongs to this why, and I myself even elaborate it into the what, how, and why. So WH and
Yep.
why, what, how, and why. So I think by this Mr. Thala has even got the answer, as well as he's able to elaborate and enhance his brand. So, moving forward to this setup, Fatma, what traits are the most important for the skilled leader communicator?
Listening.
Once
I
again,
know
this.
I harp on listening, but listening is so key. We talk so much, and listening should be at least, especially for leaders, but I would say for anybody, you should be listening at least 70% of the time, and only speaking 30% at most. A genuine leader, a servant leader, is typically the last to speak and the first to listen. But how many leaders do you know walk into a room and they speak first and they speak last? And based on what they want the organization to be like, that's usually what they push forward. That is not being an effective leader, and that is not being a servant leader. And if you really want to develop an organization or a team that respects you and that is going to thrive, then you have to appreciate their input, because the more feedback that you get, the more that you get a realistic perception of your team and your organization. And you can kind of see all of the commonalities, all the problems that people are facing. Because as a leader, you can't know everything that's going on in your organization. Things are going to trickle up to you, but only certain things. So if you want to create change in your organization or you're altering something, if you do not reach out to the people that make that happen and that are working in that environment day in and day out and don't get their feedback, then you're going to miss a lot of opportunities to push out a quality service or a quality product. So I would say, listen and care about your employees and care about your team members and get to know them on a genuine level. And not everybody wants to disclose their personal lives to people, but the truth is we cannot disconnect who we are from what we do. We are one person and we carry all of those things. But I will stress this. Sometimes when I tell people to get to know their team members, they get to know them, but they don't genuinely care about getting to know them. And we have to be genuine in our actions because, as I said before, whenever there's that disconnect, if our words don't match our behavior, people are going to see right through that and they're not going to respect us. So you have to find a way to genuinely connect with them. And I think by doing that and by listening and by getting their feedback and input, you will gain respect as a leader and you will have a more successful team and organization.
That's great. So I think, Ms. Zarab, that listening is the most fundamental one upon which Ms. Brittney will always focus. So focus on the listening side. Moving forward, we have another question, and that's how can we sync ourselves without words for the effective communication?
It's something that can't be taught. It's something that you have to embody. It is a feeling. It is a true, genuine connection. And I always talk about compassion and understanding. We have to have compassion for other people. And we cannot have compassion for other people until we start with having compassion and understanding for ourselves. We oftentimes judge ourselves. We talk down to ourselves. We have negative narratives running through our heads that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. And that affects how we view other people and it affects how we communicate to other people. Because if we are envious of someone else's intelligence or skills because we don't feel like we're good enough, then we're not going to be able to effectively listen to them and connect with them. So the connection to make sure that our words are in sync with our body language and how we're communicating, we have to really look deep within ourselves and address our own personal insecurities and challenges that are blocking us from having that desire to learn and to genuinely connect with others. We have to connect with ourselves. And that can be difficult, but it's possible.
That's really great one. I think moving forward, one of the questions that I have from my side, that during the at the different places at the different points, when an individual like I'm on the stage or during an interview or during like some kind of meeting is going on, I am in the hall. So at the different places, communication and its style may varies. So what's your perspective about the body language? Because that's also a way of communication. So what's your perspective on this one? What's your point of view? Or whether this body language may varies from place to place, or it's almost remains the same of an individual?
So when we are in front of a group, because most of the examples you used were on stage, during presentations, during webinars. We want to have open body language. Now, when we're sitting here in front of Zoom or a virtual platform, it's hard to see the rest of my body, right? You can't see my hand movements. You can't see from the chest down, right? So it's a little bit different. Eye contact is always important, and making sure that you are it helps to see people. So I can't see anyone on the other side of this, right? So that kind of takes practice, just doing it over and over again. But if you are in front of people, oftentimes we kind of like tense up and we're like, oh my gosh, all these people are looking at me. And once we're able to get in front of people again, here's some tips that I have for in person presenting and communicating. Again, we get back into our heads with everything's on me. Everybody's looking at me. I have to make sure that I am presenting this great presentation. I do this great job. And then we stop focusing on the message and we stop focusing on the purpose of the message. And that's where the problems occur. When we get nervous in front of people, we're thinking about us. When we start to clam up, we're thinking about us. When we lose our train of thought, it's because we're getting in our own heads and thinking about us. In speaking in public, it took me some time to really grasp onto this, but then once I really got it and realized my purpose for being up here is to deliver a message that is going to help other people. And my job is to make sure that it is engaging, it is informative, and they get value out of it. And when I turn the focus onto the other people, then everything else fades away. I'm not worried about what I look like. I'm not worried about how I'm going to sound, because when I am genuinely focused on delivering a message to someone else so that they can get value from it, then the nerves kind of die down. But it does take time and practice. But keeping that in mind whenever you go on stage is very important. Also, having open hands. So instead of putting our hands behind our back, instead of having them on our hips, instead of having them crossed, we want to try to have open communication, because that is very welcoming to other people. Instinctively, whenever you think about the way our brains are wired, we feel threatened naturally if someone comes on stage with their hands behind their back. Even if we know there's nothing behind their back, it makes us feel naturally uncomfortable. Also, when we have our hands crossed, that shows that either we don't really care, we're not listening, we're kind of like protecting the self. And again, we're not open. So I would say making sure that your body language reflects open communication and not closed off or threatening. I see there's a question that says, what is a solution to eliminate public speaking fear? Is that the one you were asking about, or is that kind of after this conversation that popped up?
I think the next question should be the same one. That's why
Okay.
I put it on the screen, because the conversation that's all going on at this time, and the point you have focused that one must not be scared by putting his hands at the back on this stage. So. Eliminate this public speaking fear, to eliminate this all, I think that's might be the lack of confidence, that's the fear of the public when you're on the stage. So what's the solution, what's the strategy you want to suggest at this point for all those who are fear of this public speaking?
Yeah. So ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Because oftentimes the fear that we have is looking stupid or messing up. So whenever I joined Toastmasters, which is an international public speaking organization, the very first speech that you give is called an icebreaker. And it's all about you. It's a personal story about who you are and whatever you want to talk about, but it's very personal. And we all know who we are. That's no question. Well, some people don't, but we all can talk about ourselves. If we talk to a friend or a family member, we have no problem talking about ourselves. The funny thing is, when I got up to give this speech, about 30 seconds into the speech, my mind went completely blank. I couldn't think of a thing. My mouth became dry and I had cotton mouth and I could barely talk because my mouth was so dry. My palms were sweating, and you go into this survival mode. And the problem with survival mode is whenever your sympathetic nervous system is engaged, so that's your fight or flight response, which often happens when we speak in public, our rational brain, our prefrontal cortex, shuts down. It does not work because our body is preparing us to survive. It doesn't care if we can rationally think. We're trying to survive. So the problem is if you get into that state, then you're going to forget everything on stage. So our fear ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy because the very thing that we're afraid of is going to happen because we're triggered by fear. So how do you avoid this? Well, the first step is to control your breathing, because whenever we regulate our breathing, we can calm the sympathetic nervous system. So before you get on stage, closing your eyes and taking deep breaths, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Do that for about a minute and really regulate your breathing. And then ask yourself, what am I afraid of? And for me, whenever I got up there, my fear was looking stupid, forgetting my words. And that is exactly what I did. I created my own reality. But I will say this, after that happened, whenever I stood up there in absolute silence for at least a minute, which felt like an hour, I collected my thoughts. And then after it was all over, I was like, wow, my worst fear happened and it really wasn't that bad. So sometimes what you need to do is just forget everything and face your worst fears, because then you realize, oh my gosh, I'm still alive. I didn't die. People aren't laughing at me, right? So sometimes that helps, is just getting over that speed bump.
That's really a great experience you had shared with us, and I hope Mr. Junaid Ali has, I think, at least he practiced this thing. And the point you had mentioned here that for about 5 seconds you have to breathe in and then breathe out. So I was also practicing this behind the screen, and I really got motivated by this one. I think now moving forward, this point has been clear to Mr. Junaid Ali. Now from the Thala, I think that's the question about the same of eliminating the fear, because much of the young guys have still this fear. Now another comment that's about the speech you make to yourself. That's monopoly. I think that's the same perception we have discussed before this one. So moving forward to another question that is from my side about the tone of the voice. When we have the communication is going on, and communication is going on for some interview, for some job, like a job interview, and then we will move for a meeting site to a hall. So places may vary. What's your perception about this thing, that a tone of a voice? How can we judge ourselves that at this point, my this tone is an appropriate one for this particular area or this place, and it might vary from place to place. So how can I judge myself that I'm going in a perfect manner?
So everything that's inside comes outside, right? If you're confident, then the way you talk is going to be confident. If you're concerned, then the way you talk is going to exhibit that concern. So you have to change your mindset. The problem with today is, and I don't even think it's just current times, but we often try to create these it's like very surface level approaches, right? So whenever says, well, how, if somebody says, how can I be a better listener? Then you say, oh, well, make eye contact and nod and give verbal cues like, oh, the truth is, when we are truly listening, we don't need to think about, am I giving them verbal cues? Am I making eye contact? Am I nodding in accordance with what they're saying? If we're having to think about doing those things, then we're not truly listening. And the same thing goes for our tone of voice. If we are very monotone and we're talking like this, then it probably means that we are internally either self-conscious, we're bored, we're not engaged in conversation, and we're just kind of dull inside, right? And I think that whenever we really are passionate about what we're talking about, then that's going to come out in our voice. And yes, we should be aware of our tone because some people are just very mellow people. Some people are very energetic and excited people. They talk like this all the time. And I don't know if that's a thing in Pakistan, but in the US, like we exaggerate a lot, right? Especially in our conversation. So I think it's good to be aware of that. We don't want to go into a conversation, even if we are a very optimistic and excited person, we may need to tone it down just a little bit. And a good thing to do is notice the person that you are communicating with. So if the person that you are communicating with has lower energy levels than you do, so if they walk into a room to interview and they're like, hello, Brittney-Nichole, it's nice to meet you. How are you? Matching them is a great way to build rapport. So even if you were to say, oh, I am great. How are you? Then you may want to bring it down a little bit and say, I'm great. How are you? And then if somebody's, hi, Brittney-Nichole, how are you today? I'm going to say, I'm great. How are you? So I'm mimicking the energy that that person has, but I'm still being genuine to myself. But being able to upplay or downplay the tone of our voice helps us build that connection with other people.
That's a great one. That one must be synchronized with one to whom he's communicating. So whoever is in front of you, you must have to analyze him and then communicate accordingly. I got from this answer, and where you have elaborated, that's really a great one by the examples and the change in the voice. So that's really a great one. Moving forward, one of the question that's how to overcome the panic habit.
Whew, I struggle with this one. I have just been able to overcome this, and it took some time. But again, I think it has to do with the ego. Why are we panicking? What is making us panic? What are we concerned about? And addressing that instead of overlooking it. Is the thing that we're panicking about something we have control over or not? So, a lot of people, I'm going to use COVID-19 as an example because all of us around the world are experiencing that. And some people are very panicked and anxious and concerned about the what ifs. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to contract the virus? Is my family going to be okay? And then you have to ask yourself, okay, so I'm panicking about things that I do not know. I don't know if I'm going to lose my job. I don't know if I'm going to contract the virus. I don't know if my family is going to get it or if they're going to be okay. So I'm allowing myself to get into this state of panic, which is creating all these chemicals that for long periods of time can create a toxic environment in your body. And the things that you're worrying about, you don't have the answer to. So, my question is, why stress ourselves out over things that we don't have control over? And then ask ourselves, what do I have control over? Well, I may not know if I'm going to have a job after this, but how can I take control of the situation? Being, how can I develop skills now where if I do lose my job, I'm prepared for a plan B? If I were to get this, what does that mean? If I get the virus, what does that mean? Is it something I can control? No. Then why am I going to worry about it now? It's something I'm going to deal with if and when it happens. Hopefully it doesn't, but I'm not going to stress out about it now. So I think the key to reducing this habit of being panicky and anxious about things is asking ourselves, is this something I have control over? And if it is, then what can I do to prepare for that? Take action on that and plan. And if you don't have control over it, ask yourself, why am I going to worry about something that I don't have control over? I will deal with it when it happens. And I know that's easier said than done. And I really don't know when the switch happened from worrying about things, because now I don't know what happened, but I went from being constantly anxious and I would have panic attacks where my vision would go black and I felt like I was dying, quite literally, to not being concerned about things. And I think it's all about having that perception of, can I control it? And if I can, what can I do about it? But if not, I mean, why stress yourself out?
uh, don't be panicked, and because your whole communication will be distorted according to that behavior, your mindset. I think now moving to the last part of this session, and the question is about pitching of the startups or the SMEs, because when they move in the front of investors, in the front of great guys of that field, they have to pitch their startup idea, their whatever they have. So for the pitching, what the fundamental communication skills or the points they have to keep in their mind and they have to behave in that manner to make their that pitching more effective one. So I think the I'd elaborate a big one for the pitching this communication, because you have to communicate in a perfect manner to make the investor synchronized according to your mind. So the communication is the ultimate, I think, weapon at that point. So
Yeah.
what you want to suggest?
So there are people who specialize in working with entrepreneurs and startups to develop a pitch. It's not my area particular of expertise. For me, I'm more interpersonal communication, intra and interpersonal. So communication within yourself and communication between other people. But with pitching, it's unique within itself, right? It has a lot of marketing and sales and things like that in it. So it's not my area of expertise, but I will say going to a lot of pitches in the startup community and watching them for myself, start to do that. If you can go to places, we have organizations in Charlotte, Charlotte Inno. And so I go to that and I watch people pitch. And then I say, how do I feel about that pitch? What connected with me? And watching other people pitch and saying, did they sell me on that? Or did I feel like they were trying too hard? I think that's an important thing is people try too hard to sell you on their idea and they lose that genuine connection with their service and with their product. And if you lose that passion and that fire for why you're doing it, then no matter how good the dialogue is, no matter the verbiage you have, you're going to lose people. So I would say, watch other people pitch, take notes. What did you like? What did you disconnect with? Start to see those similarities in the things that really resonated with you. And then also finding a mentor or someone that specializes in that. But bottom line is you have to be connected with your pitch and with your why. You have to.
That's a really great suggestion, that one have to first to view those who are already pitching, so that you can get the point that what attracts me, or what's suitable for me. So according to that, you can search out the points that I have to focus on these ones. I think there is one more question from the audience side. So, what is the procedure to avoid the overthinking and improving the decision making ability? It might be a bit different from the effective communication side, but if you want to answer this one, you're welcome.
Oh man, to avoid overthinking. Um, hmm, it's a good question because give me just a second to think about how I'm going to answer this. Um, I think it depends on the type of person you are. So some people do overthink quite a bit and they just cannot make a decision because they're looking at every single situation. And I think maybe visually making a list of pros and cons of decisions and the benefits and then asking other people for their input. But when you ask other people for their input, you've got to be very, very careful. So, within the research world, the reason that you don't have a pool of 10 people that you survey for research is because you need the larger the pool of people you ask, the more data you have to compare. And you'll start to see commonalities and then you'll have those outliers. So, anytime you're engaging other people about decision making, and trying to help you kind of come to a resolution, you have to be careful that they are not just giving you their personal opinion because we like to give advice based on what's worked for us and what we've experienced. And you will start to hear people give different advice, and then you can get into that feedback loop again of overthinking. Well, this person said this and this person said this. So I would say get feedback from other people if you need help, but also take it with a grain of salt, meaning don't just run with it just because that is their advice. Just say, well, I think that would work for me, or I don't think that would work for me. But maybe writing it down and doing pros and cons. That's a tough one. That's tricky.
I hope that a bit Mr. Julian had cleared this point, that how can he take a decision. So it might be, Mr. Juliet, you can view one of the video from my channel, because I had worked for about 7 years on this topic of decision making. So that might be a bit helpful for you from that. I think moving to the towards the last side, and spreading. First of all, I think it's the last of the time. I wanna say once again thanks to you for this whole. I think for an hour, and you had clarified much of the points, much of the questions from the audience side, from my side, and I want to request you to add the final remarks for our audience for the session. What you want to add on any point of view and any perspective. It's not just for the communication side, on any aspect if you want to say something.
So my final remarks, and this is what I say usually for most of my interviews, is to make this world a better place, to improve your life, to improve your business, you've got to start employing uh, understanding and compassion for other people. And we've really got to get out of our own heads and look at the greater good, because a lot of things that is for the greater good isn't always comfortable or pleasant for us. but this world is going to continue to go on long after we're gone. And so that would be my final remarks, is just to create change, to create positive change, we have to start thinking about others around us. And thank you so
It's
much
really
for
a
this.
great.
I've really appreciated being a part of this. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
It's really our prayer that you, the senior guys, have on this platform and guide us all. Not only this, I think the final remarks are also I think that these are really the great words that one must have to perform in a way that he's not only for himself but for the whole humanity. So, on the behalf of whole team, I would like to say thanks for you for your time, the great words, and see you inshallah in the coming sessions too. Our
Yeah,
great conferences, annual conferences too.
definitely.
So
Thank you. It was
goodbye,
my
man.
pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was really a great session with Mr. Bradin, and we had discussed multiple points, multiple questions on the topic of effective communication. Hope to have you all in the coming sessions soon. और जैसे मैंने आपको स्टार्ट में बताया था, तो उर्दू में थोड़ा सा लास्ट में आई वुड लाइक टू से इन उर्दू लैंग्वेज दैट काफ़ी दिनों के बाद मेरी वापसी हुई इस प्लेटफॉर्म के ऊपर, तो इंशाल्लाह आगे कंटिन्यू रहेंगे हम लोग के सेशंस। मिलते हैं कभी हम लोग के पास जो नए गेस्ट आते हैं उनके साथ once again. Hope to see you.